Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get our day underway, so I think if we can, looks like we have a few more people milling around. All right, it looks like we're good to start. So, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Happy Friday. It looks like the rain might have paused for just a few minutes, which is wonderful. I don't know about you all, but I got trapped in it last night unexpectedly, which was an interesting experience. Nonetheless, it's always fun to get poured on as you're walking from your car to your home, but nonetheless. So it looks like we get a little break for just a little while. So I would like to start by welcoming everyone that's in the room to our program management review for the 2020 census. As always, I'm extraordinarily appreciative of everybody's time and the fact that we have such a full house on a Friday afternoon. So thank you all for coming. I do hope that everybody is enjoying their day. As always, we're going to start with some housekeeping items. So sometimes I feel like we really should just record this because it's the same slide, each program management review, but we have a little bit, I have at least one new thing to say today, so that's exciting. So do remember, it's very easy to forget from time to time that this entire room is mic'd. It's on the webcast, the program management review itself is being webcast. So be cognizant of the fact that even if your mic is not on, it is possible that it can be picked up and that can be heard elsewhere. So I do encourage you to remember that and consider that the mics may be live at all times. I'd also ask that when you're asking a question, if you could please state your name before beginning the question. That will help all of us in the room, but it will also help those folks that are watching it via the webcast to understand where the questions are coming from. With that, I'm going to pause for just a second and invite Mike Polensky, who is here today, who's our Chief of Acquisitions, who will say just a few words to remind us all of the legal obligations that we have when speaking with contractors.
Enrique
Mike?
turns around and looks at me like, what are you going to say this time? Hi, I'm Mike Polensky. Just for those of you here in the room and throughout listening to this, just the importance, we have many acquisitions that are being conducted right now that are in the process of whether it's through evaluation or just before award. There are upcoming acquisitions that are going to be hitting the street as it relates to 2020 decennial. So just please, all the information, only share what's publicly available. Okay, so if there are requirements out there, you can talk about what's publicly available, but you cannot share. There's a lot of contractors here. There's contractors in the building working. So you just have to be very sensitive and careful with the information that you talk to contractors and other people about. If they don't have a need to know, then you don't talk about those things. If it's not publicly available, you don't talk about those things. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Just a couple other housekeeping items. I think by now most of you know the location of the restrooms, but just in case you don't, you just go out these doors, turn that way, and they are right by the elevators, the green elevators. You can find the restrooms there. And in the case of an emergency, we'll most likely hear something over our PA system, but even if we don't, if we do have an emergency, just follow the staff and we'll all very quickly but politely exit the building to appropriate locations. The last thing I wanted to point out in terms of housekeeping is you all do have iPads, and if you have any challenges or problems with your iPads, if you just raise your hand, one of our wonderful IT staff that are right over there, will give you a hand with those if you have any questions at all or if something isn't working as it should. And I would like to thank them for all the work they do to get them loaded and set up. I know you guys come in and it's all working, but I was down here a couple hours ago and they were hard at work making sure that everything was how it should be. So thank you, I appreciate it. With that, we'll turn to the agenda for today. So it's a very exciting agenda. I'm really excited about this. I'm always excited, but I think today you're really just going to love the program that we have and all the updates that we have in mind for you. As usual, it's very, very full agenda, so I do ask that you allow us a little flexibility with how the afternoon will go. We may take a little bit more time with a particular topic or shorten a break or something like that so that we can make sure we do cover it all. Our agenda today will include just some high-level program updates that Deb and I will do in a few minutes, and then we'll turn our attention to testing. And for this program management review, we're going to really focus in two areas. Alexa will first give us an update on our 2017 census test, which we are right in the middle of. I'm really extraordinarily pleased with how that test is going. Not to steal her thunder, it doesn't mean that it's all perfect, but I'm very, very pleased with how that test is going. And then we'll turn to Marianne and to Andy, who are going to give us an update on our administrative records research and planning and how that leads into the changes that we've put into place for our business operations for non-response follow-up, all leading to our end-to-end test. So I know this is a briefing and a discussion that everyone has long been waiting for, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that today. Then we'll break, and after the break, we'll turn our attention to just our 2020 census operations. We'll have Brian Timko, who will do an update for us on the local update of census addresses. That program is underway, so we're excited about that. Then Jenny Kim will do an update for us on our 2020 census language program, just to share with us what the innovations are in those areas and where we are with our program planning. And Greg Hanks will actually give an update and a description of our work with the Postal Service, and I'm pleased that our friends from the Postal Service are here with us this afternoon as well, so thank you for joining us. Autry and Patty will then round out the afternoon with the discussion of our system readiness, and they'll focus on a number of things just to keep us all up to date. And then, for the first time, I get to do the wrap-up, so this will be an interesting experience for me as we move through that. So moving on to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to start today with was really by putting where we are today in context, sharing with you some of the recent accomplishments and the upcoming work of the census itself. You all know that we've moved really firmly into the implementation phase and execution phase. Oh, I forgot that. Thanks. I skipped a whole thing I was supposed to do. There's good reason why. Look, she just slid that right to me. So let me pause. We'll stay on this slide. But let me transition nicely to what I forgot to do, which was by no means an indication of this. You know, anytime we're working on a program this large, and as we look at where we are today and where we've come from and where we have to go, we realize that it's not just the folks sitting on the stage or the folks that are walking around the halls that are doing it. It's the team. It's the, as Deb likes to say, she's filling the boat, right? It's the whole group of people that come together. And at each program management review, we like to recognize and introduce you all to our new managers that we've brought on into the 2020 census program. With this update, we do have, even with the hiring freeze that we've been under up until recently, we were able to bring a few people on since the last program management review, and I very much meant to take this opportunity to introduce you to them. So first off, if Emily is here, Emily Crutch, she is. If you could please stand, if we could have the folks stand when I introduce them. Emily is our new chief of our decennial budget office. Many of you will remember, as we talked about our reorganization over the last few years, we brought together 3 budget offices from within the decennial directorate into one. And we were really so excited that Emily has taken on the leadership of this office and really helping us strengthen our controls and our work and our efforts around our budget process. So thank you, Emily. Ian Hull, where is Ian? There's Ian. We welcome Ian to the Decennial Directorate. He's in our Decennial Census Management Division. Ian is now our Assistant Division Chief for Geographic Operations. So he has vast experience actually working both at the Census Bureau at headquarters, but also in our regional office, where he has direct experience, in fact, working on address canvassing and many of the programs that he is now responsible for planning. So we were very pleased to steal him from the Economic Directorate and bring him on board into the Decennial Directorate. So thank you, Ian. Okay, Mohammed Shaushi. Excellent. In the back of the room, we have Mohammed. And Mohammed is a new manager for us in our Decennial Information Technology Division. And he's really working across the area supporting our census applications development. We're very excited. I think he's been with us for a little while at the Census Bureau, but he's been around the Census Bureau even longer than he's been officially working with us. So we were very pleased to have him on board as well. And the last manager that I will introduce today is Brian Timko, who I know is here because he's speaking later. There he is. Brian. So I'd like us to congratulate Brian on accepting within our geography division our 2020 census coordinator position. So Brian really will be the central person for making sure all of those geographic operations come together in support of the 2020 census program from GEO's perspective, and working very closely with Ian. So it's nice that we have the 2 teams here at this very moment. So thank you, and you'll get to hear from Brian later today. Okay, now back to where I was. And again, I do apologize for that oversight on my part. I don't know how I did that. So it happens when you don't look at the talking points and you just talk. So Where are we and what are we doing? Well, we're actively working on the planning for the census. You know, we've moved very firmly from research and development into the execution phase. We're in the middle right now of our 2017 census test, and frankly, we're already in the process. We're already underway in many ways for our 2018 end-to-end census test. You may wonder why I say we're already underway for that when the end-to-end census test doesn't really start. That's what people think till April 1st. We actually start address canvassing for that test in just a few months, and we're doing the recruiting, the onboarding, the hiring of those staff in support of that address canvassing operation now. We're working on the office structures now. That test is very much underway for us in terms of our end-to-end program. We're also actively working on the 2020 census itself, so we're working on things related to field infrastructure, to space, to our Decennial Logistics Management Center. All of those things are underway, and while we won't talk extensively about many of those today, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that this program is extraordinarily complex with many, many, many moving pieces. Before I move off this slide, I also wanted to remind everybody, this is one of those shameless plugs I like to do, about our 2020 Census website. It is a vast resource of information. On our website, you will find our 2020 Census operational plan, you'll find our decision memorandum, you'll find all of our program management reviews, and pretty much anything related to a high level or a big ticket decision that we might have made. So it's just a great place to go for recent information. With that, I want to change gears a little bit and talk with you all for just a few minutes about our current budget situation. As all of you know, we're still operating under a continuing resolution, although we are quite hopeful that we'll know more about the FY17 budget status within the next few weeks. The budget uncertainty that we're dealing with did necessitate us making some changes to the 2020 program this fiscal year. I did highlight those changes at the last program management review. To lay the foundation, though, and kind of remind us of where we are, I do want to remind you, and I won't spend as much time on it today, what some of those program changes were. We did talk last time about the fact that we were replanning our address canvassing operation, including making changes to both our in-office address canvassing, which will in turn lead to changes in our in-field address canvassing, as well as the MAF coverage study. We've also paused and delayed some of our efforts related to our advertising and communications contract and our partnership program. We've delayed the opening of the regional census centers by about 3 months. We're still working on the details there, but it looks like about 3 months. And we are currently working on replanning several operations, most notably, from what I talked about last time, our census coverage measurement operation and our evaluations and experiments. And those were just a few of the program changes that we did talk about at the last program management review. The budget uncertainty still exists, although we are quite hopeful that in the next few weeks we'll have greater certainty around that, which will allow us to fully understand what this year will look like for the program and how that leads toward the future. I wanted to just do a few contract updates for us. I think we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the contracts that were awarded in 2016, which are those at the top of the screen. So I'm not going to spend much time on details on those today. In some ways, you'll hear from Alexa, actually, about many of the successes with those contracts. In particular, she'll talk a little bit about how we fielded already the Census Questionnaire Assistance coming out of our Census Questionnaire Assistance contract in our 2017 census test. So we're very, very pleased about that. With that said, we are currently working on awarding 3 contracts in 2017 listed on the slide. We are working on the award for our Decennial Device as a Service contract. We expect that award to come in early spring. I think we're very close on that and just working through the last stages of that contract award. From there, we're also working on our fingerprinting and badging contract. This contract will be a single contract for the 2018 end-to-end census test peak operations, and it will last through the completion of the 2020 census field operations. Our timetable of award for that contract is this summer, sometime between July through September. We anticipate making that contract award, which will be plenty of time for us to be able to use it for our peak operations in the end-to-end census test. We are also working on the award of our field IT deployment contract. We refer to that as our FIT contract, if you hear that. This will be a single contract for providing the information technology equipment, the logistic services, maintenance, and support for the regional census centers, the area census offices, our remote workers, island area offices, and the paper data capture centers. This shows a contract award date of around September of 2017. We are working a very aggressive schedule for that contract. We actually think we'll be awarding it a little bit earlier than September, but our plan is a September date right now. And so those are the contracts that we are working on at this point in time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb, who's going to change gears and talk with us about some of our recent accomplishments.
Thanks, Lisa. Nice to be here with you all this afternoon. Take up the reins here where Shireen normally would have jumped in and I would be doing what Alexa was doing. So this is a nice change to keep us on our toes. So since we last met and was gone over in a little bit more detail at the January PMR, we have met our statutory deadline and delivered the subjects proposed for the 2020 census and the ACS to Congress. Those were delivered on March 28th. Some of you who have great interest in that aspect of our program may have reviewed that document online. And on this side, excuse me, we want to continue to remind everybody of the milestones that we maintain in our census integrated master schedule. The framework is probably familiar, except for the certainly for those of you who are old hat and see this slide all the time. It's always nice to put a check mark there by something, which you can see we did on the topic submission to Congress. This is certainly just a sample of the key milestones for the program, and so we just like to keep it updated. So moving on to risks. On this slide, we just want to remind everybody about risk. And we keep our program and our project level registers up to date. This framework too remains unchanged, and we continue to monitor and update as necessary. Just as a reminder, our portfolio has a program risk register and then a project risk register for the 34 operations, each one, as well as our tests. What you're seeing here is just a sampling of the key risks that we maintain every month in our risk cube. But for a change this time, we're not going to say there's nothing new that happened on this cube. So since our January PMR, we actually had one of our red risks, which was centered around implementing the innovative design as described in our original operational plan. That actually became an issue. And I think if you draw some conclusions from what Lisa has said and how we're redesigning the program, that had always been a risk, but given our funding uncertainty, it became an issue. So we're working through that issue. You can see it here noted as new program issue number 2. Actually, on program issue number 1, increased workload for address canvassing is related to that. So our speculation in our risk register about impacts that would happen with funding uncertainty, we're turning them over as risks at this point, and we're working them and fleshing this risk out. I just wanted to remind everybody of our process, so I know sometimes if you ask questions, you expect the register to change the next day, which is why I wanted to remind everyone it's a program risk portfolio, and then it's 36 right now, project level risk registers. So how does our risk review board that doesn't just meet all day, every day, 5 days a week, how do we keep that up to date? We review those project risk registers twice a year, even though the integrated product teams can update them as necessary. The RRB does that twice every year. And we're now also revisiting our program risks, a couple at each meeting. We meet every other week to either validate or, like we did for this example, turn that risk into an issue. And I think that's it. This is kind of a short opening this time, right?
So I think
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So I think we have a few minutes for questions before we turn to some of the meat of our presentations. If there are any questions, we're happy to take a few. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa Pearson, GAO. So on the question on slide 7, for the, on the fingerprinting contract, it says peak operations will be,
NERFU.
so is
So
that?
not for address canvassing, but for the operations that will occur in fiscal year 18, in the spring of 18.
Okay. And so what are you doing for address canvassing for?
I would answer that question, but somebody else would answer it more technically accurate. So I will give my answer and someone will correct it, but we're using the same processes that we've been using in our previous tests.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
Sure. Any other questions for us? All right. If not, then we're going to turn it over to Alexa, who's going to jump right into the 2017 census test. Thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me all right? All right, so as you know, the 2017 census test has been underway for about a month now, and I'm very excited to be able to talk about it with you today. This test is a nationwide self-response test consisting of 80,000 housing units across the United States with an April 1st, 2017 census day. The 2017 census test is allowing us to test key new systems and integration of operations and systems for self-response, and to test the feasibility of collecting tribal enrollment information. For this test, households are able to respond online, by phone, and by mail. Our national sample of 80,000 housing units are in mailable areas across the United States. To limit respondent burden, we removed housing units that have participated in prior census tests or the American Community Survey. And the sample for this test was stratified with an oversample of housing units in Alaska, areas with relatively higher populations of American Indians and Alaska Natives, and areas with a lower propensity to respond online. In addition to the self-response focus of the test, there's a re-interview portion that's conducted over the phone. The tribal enrollment re-interview is for a sample of housing units that responded to the self-response portion of the test. The focus is on households that are geographically located in Alaska, as well as households that contain people who indicate they are enrolled in a tribe, are a shareholder, or racially identified as American Indian Alaska Native. Next slide. All right, the 80,000 housing units I mentioned earlier are assigned to one of two panels. In the first mailing, the Internet First panel received a letter inviting them to participate by responding online. The Internet Choice panel received a paper questionnaire in addition to an invitation letter, so they had the choice to respond either online or by calling CQA or in paper at their first opportunity. Because of the oversampling I described, the breakdown of the sampled households between Internet First and Internet Choice is a bit more heavily skewed towards choice than some prior census tests. For this test, roughly 60% of the sample is in the Internet First panel, and about 40% is in the Internet Choice panel. In that second table up there, you can see that about 87% of the addresses in sample were slated to receive English-only materials, while about 13% were slated to receive bilingual materials in English and Spanish. Next slide. The first mailing for the 2017 census test occurred on March 20th. The first mailing included either an invitation to respond online or the invitation letter plus a paper questionnaire, as I mentioned. After the first mailing, the Internet First and Internet Choice panels received similar materials for the duration of the test. 3 days after the initial invitation, a reminder was sent to all households encouraging respondents to complete the questionnaire. So the first two mailings were sent to the entire universe of households. And after the second contact, households that had not yet responded received up to 3 more reminders, with a fourth mailing containing a paper questionnaire for both panels. The last mailing, our famous It's Not Too Late postcard, was mailed yesterday. So we are now complete for the mailing, and I'm very happy to say that as one who worries about the mailing piece. Go on to the next. So this has a little bit of information about the operational testing for 2017. For Internet self-response, this was our first test using the eCase platform. We had 2 opportunities for people to respond in English and Spanish. They could toggle back and forth between the languages as they move throughout the instrument, and we've had responses in both languages. For census questionnaire assistance, as Lisa mentioned, this was our first test to utilize the Census Questionnaire Assistance Contract solution, which included both an interactive voice response system that was active and handled a bunch of calls, and also live agents taking responses by phone. The languages supported for the 2017 census tests are up on the screen there: English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, and Arabic. And I believe we have had responses in all of those languages, although, as we would expect, the numbers are small for some. For paper data capture, we're testing new paper control processes, new way to move the paper throughout the national processing centers. They do the scanning and other work on the actual paper responses. And we're also testing a new checkout procedure at the end of the paper data capture. All right, so the meat that everyone's interested in. These are our preliminary self-response information as of this last Wednesday, April 19th, 2017. So as of Wednesday, just shy of 30% of the sample households had responded to the 2017 census test. About 17,000 responses have been submitted via the internet, which includes more than 2,000 responses that came in from households in the Internet Choice Panel. So those who had the opportunity to respond by paper from the initial beginning of the test. Jumping now to the end of the table, to the mail column, as of Wednesday, we had a little more than 5,500 paper responses from the Internet Choice Panel. For now, we don't have any mail responses from the Internet First Panel, but all households were mailed paper questionnaires on April 10th. So those will be trickling in soon. We actually track the mail on its way back and are starting to see those in the mail flow on the way back, and some have actually already been received at the National Processing Center as well. As I mentioned in the last slide, this test is utilizing Census Questionnaire Assistance Solution, and so far CQA has received about 5,000 total calls so far, with about 58% being handled by the calls referred, that's the calls referred to agents, they're handled by the customer service reps and the CQA solution. And those are responding and turning into about 1,336 responses that come in by phone. So we're very excited to see that that process appears to be well underway for this test. All right, we'll go to the next one. This is my last official slide, and it just shows the key activities for the 2017 census test. As I mentioned, the first mailing was on March 20th, and that was the moment we turned the lights on for internet self-response, including the non-ID processing, census questionnaire assistance, and started to work on our paper data capture solution. Our census day was April 1st, 2017. The re-interview process just started April 10th, and that'll run through July 10th. And our last mailing, as I mentioned, was April 20th. I think that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, happy to take them now. And I have tons of support in the room for all the different operations if you have specifics.
Hi, Ty Mitchell, Government Accountability Office. Thank you for the update. A couple quick questions. The responses, the response rates you've got, how does that compare to what you were expecting? I mean, I know it's hard to predict exactly what you're going to get, but I mean, can you comment on how those fit in the ranges of what you were kind of expecting to get?
By and large, they were about what we were expecting to get for this test. Certainly could punt it to Sarah Connie, I believe, is in the room for more specifics, but we are, at least in terms of what we were anticipating mailing out, each future mailing after we started pulling out the responding households, that was very much in line with what we had anticipated and got printed in advance of being able to mail. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Studies Division. Just wanted to mention that we're still waiting for a lot of those paper responses to return, as well as most households haven't received that fifth mailing yet, so we expect to see another percentage or two coming in as a result of that fifth mailing. So where we are right now with the responses is in line with what we would expect, and of course we're certainly not done receiving responses.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. And then on the targeting for the bilingual forms, does someone know what variable is that an ACS percentage of race, ethnicity, or something? I'm concerned. The real specific which one is because I'm also interested if that's the same variable Andrew was using in some of the analysis that they did with the administrative records. Do we know what variable was used for targeting?
Sorry.
So it was a Spanish flag that indicated if a tract contained 20% or more of the population that had at least one person in a household 15 years or older that did not speak English well, and English was not their first language. The specific variable I don't have off the top of my head, but it was what I just described, the 20% or higher for a tract.
Do we know where that variable came from?
5-year ACS estimates, 2010 to 2014.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, Lisa Pearson. Curious about the re-interview portion of that. What was the purpose of the re-interview, and if you can describe a little bit about that?
Sure. I think Sarah is going to come back and talk about the re-interview as well.
Sure. So the purpose is to assess the feasibility of asking a tribal enrollment question. So during the re-interview, we asked the same question that we asked during self-response, as well as a few more probing questions. And the point of our analysis is to check for a few different things. We want to look at item non-response rates, and we also want to look at consistency between the self-response answers and the re-interview answers.
If I can just add in
Thank
a
you.
little bit more on the re-interview, we're also, as part of that sample, re-interviewing some of the non-ID cases. I'm going to cough. Sorry.
Dan Cork, National Academies, just following up on that with the re-interview covering part of the non-ID responses. Just curious, order of magnitude relative to expectations, amount coming in non-ID versus entering the ID.
So the non-ID has been a relatively small proportion of all of the responses we've received thus far, which is as we'd expect, certainly across all modes, because the folks who are responding to the test that we count in that non-ID group are those in sample who have responded non-ID. And to be in sample, you would have gotten some materials, and so generally people are responding using their actual identification census ID. Now, we do expect that in general, the non-ID proportions will likely be higher in the actual census because there will be more information about, the census going on, and people are expecting to be able to respond to it, maybe haven't been watching for the thing coming through their mail. But generally, what we've seen so far is a pretty low proportion of non-ID responses.
Other questions?
Yep. Do we have any other questions? Sorry, we're having technical difficulties, which is always fun. But look, we have help coming to us already. It's not operator error. Do we have any other questions on the 2017 census test? Okay, if not, we're going to move on to our next presentation. And I believe it's Mary Ann who's going to kick us off to get this started, so thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to be here with you today to provide an update on our plans for the non-response follow-up operation. With just a few short years remaining before 2020, we are converging on the operational design that we'll implement for non-response follow-up as part of the 2020 census. We have learned many lessons from our past tests, going back as far as the 2013 census test, and most recently from the 2016 census test. Some aspects of that operational design worked very well, and we're carrying those forward from test to test. There were other aspects that didn't work as well, and we are refining those and or removing those from the operational design that we'll ultimately implement for 2020. We're very much looking forward to the 2018 end-to-end census test to help us solidify what will be the design that we will implement for the 2020 non-response follow-up. In our presentation today, we'll provide you updates on a number of aspects related to the operational design for non-response follow-up. We'll start really with Andy giving you a deep dive on our administrative records usage within the non-response follow-up operational design. We'll then touch on various other aspects of non-response follow-up specific to what we will implement as part of the 2018 end-to-end test. First, I'll start and just give a little bit of background about the 2018 end-to-end test. I'll speak in some level of detail to the non-response follow-up universe creation. We'll talk about early non-response follow-up, which is a new component that we'll be implementing with the 2018 end-to-end test. Talk a little bit about enumerator training, a review of our non-response follow-up field data collection contact strategies. We'll revisit and give an update on our multi-unit manager visit approach. We'll talk about field verification, which is another new component that we'll be adding with the scope of the 2018 end-to-end census test. We'll give an update on proxy enumeration, quality control, and we'll talk about the operational control system enhancements. Our goal today is to really provide a sense of the operational design, highlighting the new components of the design, as well as the implementation of our lessons learned from some of the past tests. There are many aspects of the non-response operational design that we will not be able to touch on today, but we do look forward to be able to give you updates on some of those other aspects in future PMRs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Keller, who's going to share with you details on our administrative records usage.
Sure. So thank you very much, Mary Ann. I'm going to start the discussion today with the 2016 census test, and specifically, as Mary Ann mentioned, I'm going to provide more information on how we use administrative records to integrate with the 2016 NRFU contact strategy. And I'll try and say administrative records rather than AR, but if I say AR, I mean administrative records. And then eventually, I'm going to end up talking about the 2018 contact strategy. So a brief outline. I'm going to go through the 2016 NRFU contact strategy with administrative records determination, where we kind of inserted administrative records into the operation. Then I'm going to go into depth about how we did the administrative record methodology for determining occupied, vacant, and non-existent or deleted addresses. Then I'm going to turn to characteristics for administrative record enumeration, how we're conducting the research and where we're getting those characteristics from. Then I'm going to discuss some research findings, both on what we found in the 2016 census test and also some simulation work that we've done on the 2010 census data, looking retrospectively. And then finally, as I said, I'm going to end up talking about the proposed 2018 end-to-end census test NRFU contact strategy with administrative records involved. So here's the picture of the 2016 contact strategy for NRFU. And so the way I kind of look at it is I think about these two paths. So we have our NRFU housing units on the left, and at the top we have our, what I'm calling our vacant and delete path. And so what we're going to do, and I'm going to talk about this later, is we use our administrative records to determine vacant or non-existent units. And so I'm going to, as I said, go into depth about that later. And in the 2016 census test, after we determined it was vacant or delete, we sent a mailing to the NRFU address. So that was around May 15th or so, which we'll call it our AR mailing. And after that mailing occurred, if we got a self-response, we processed that self-response and closed out the unit. If not, we call that unit administrative records vacant or non-existent. So we have this kind of designation as we start out. If we think it's vacant from our models, we think it's non-existent from our models. If we didn't get a response back, we enumerated the case in that fashion. Okay, so our bottom path. So for the remainder of the cases we have in our NRFU universe, we attempted one interview. And if we resolve the case in that one interview, that's fine. If we didn't resolve that case, then we look to see if we had administrative records indicating that it was occupied. If we did, we turned around and sent a mailing to that address. Now that was a little bit fuzzy around the May 15th date because we had to wait to actually conduct the first interview. And again, if we get a self-response back, we're going to take that self-response and resolve it using the self-response. If not, we have administrative records to enumerate that unit. And then if you go to the bottom, there are cases for which we don't have an administrative records designation, neither vacant nor delete nor occupied. We did the additional field contacts, I think it was 6 in the 2016 census test, and then we either resolved it or did not resolve it. So that's the 2016 picture. Okay. So what administrative record sources do we use to determine vacancy? So first, we use data from the United States Postal Service, your USPS. USPS, undeliverable as addressed information, which we shorthand as UAA. And the reasons for census mailings being UAA made around April 1st. So some of those reasons include the unit was vacant, there was no such number. The letter carrier couldn't find the number that was on the envelope. Or no such street, letter carrier couldn't find the street, or other reasons why a case is UAA. And there are about 10 or so reasons we collected, received in the 2016 census test. Another piece of information we use from the USPS is its delivery sequence file. In particular, is it a residential or commercial unit? Other sources for our vacancy determination are from the Internal Revenue Service, the 1040 filings. IRS's 1099 filings, a database from the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Medicare Enrollment Database, Indian Health Service Patient Database, and the third-party Veteran Service Group of Illinois, VSGI files. So with that as our administrative records data, how do we determine the vacant units? So we train our model on the universe of 2010 NRFU addresses, about 50 million cases. Our dependent variable is the 2010 NRFU status of occupied, vacant, or non-existent. Our explanatory variables include, and again, these are the 2010 vintage, as you might expect, the presence of UAA status, and the reason we got back in terms of why we could not mail that unit on both the first and second mailing. We also collect the consistency of reasons by UA reasons at the zip code level, whether or not the UA reasons are consistent, aggregated to a zip code level. As well, we take indicators for presence of persons in these AR sources I just laid out at the particular address, or indicators for presence of these persons at other addresses. And finally, we take ACS area level estimates of percentage renters, poverty, black, so on and so forth. So, how do we differentiate between the cases we call vacant and the other cases? So here's what we did in the 2016 census test. So on the left, you can see the vertical axis, which indicates the predicted vacant probability. On the bottom, the horizontal axis indicates the predicted occupied probability. So we define a distance function, which can be visualized as the successive bands of cases emanating from the point 0, 1 in the top left-hand corner. So we're really confident about the cases in the upper left-hand corner. So each successive band represents an additional 1% of the NRFU workload. So in this particular example, Unit A is identified as AR vacant, while Unit B is not. And we go through a similar type of approach for non-existent or addresses that need to be deleted. So that takes care of the vacant and deleted addresses in terms of the modeling. So how do we identify units that are occupied via administrative records? And this helps us know whether we can reduce contacts for 101 Main Street. So remember, we did that one contact. How do we know we can take it out of the field after that one contact if we couldn't resolve it? So the first thing we do is we build a roster from our administrative record sources. Then we check to see that multiple sources in administrative records indicate that the family lives at that address. Then we use our statistical models to evaluate the roster, and again, I'm going to get into those statistical models in the next few slides. And then we make a decision for 101 Main Street, and by the way, we call it AR occupied. So, again, similar question, what AR sources do we use to determine occupancy? So our core sources for occupied rosters include data from the Internal Revenue Service, our 1040 individual tax returns, and our 1099 information returns. Data from the Medicare, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Medicare Enrollment Database, as well as data from the Indian Health Service Patient Database. Additional sources which we use in our modeling are data from the Social Security Administration Number Identification or NUMINIT file, data from the Best Race and Hispanic Origin file from the Center for Administrative Records Research and Applications, or CARE here at the Census Bureau, data from the United States Postal Service, again, our UIA data for the mailings that occur around the April 1st date, data from the delivery sequence file of the United States Postal Service, and also this Veteran Service Group of Illinois, VSGI, name and address resource, and Tracker Plus files. So some additional resources, additional AR sources that we are researching, data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, including the Computerized Home Underwriting Management System file, or CHUMS, Public Indian Housing Information Center, or PIC, Tenant Rental Assistance Certification System, or TRACS, Selective Service System Registration data from the United States Postal Service indicating national change of address, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program data, which referred to as SNAP, and other state program participation data, Kara's KidLink file, which associates children with their parents, as well as CoreLogic's tax and deed information. And so the important part to know is we're going to continue to research these sources, and we'll have a finalization or finalize these sources that we're going to use in September of 2018. So let's look at an example for a 4-person administrative records roster for 101 Main Street. So this is what we see on our AR file. So we have Juan Garcia, who's a 43-year-old male, who's Hispanic. Maria Garcia, a 43-year-old Hispanic female. Jose Garcia, a 17-year-old Hispanic male. And Lucy Garcia, a 14-year-old Hispanic female. And so the two questions we want to answer as part of our modeling are, how likely is it that we are counting all the Garcia family in the right place? And how likely is it that the household composition of the Garcia family matches that of the census? So let's take the first question. We call this our person place model. So how likely is it that we are enumerating the Garcia family at the right place? So this is a person level model. So again, in order to kind of train our model, we're using 2010 vintage data over our 50 million NERFU addresses, and we obtain 2010 vintage administrative record data for these addresses. So our dependent variable is that we want to determine whether the person or place pair is observed in the 2010 census or not. So some of the independent variables include properties of the address. What's the count of persons in administrative records? What's the composition of the household? What do we know about it, the household, in terms of the UAA returns? Indicators for presence of administrative record sources of that address. Is there anybody on 1040, 1099, Medicare, Indian Health Service? Indicators for presence of AR sources at other addresses. Can we find those people in administrative records at other addresses on their administrative record source files? And also some area level parameters, ACS, renters, poverty, black, so on and so forth. We have a full list in some of the research papers we've done. So the process is, based on these 2010 relationships, we can assign probabilities to a current vintage of administrative records data. So we're going to fit our models with the 2010 data, and we're going to apply it to the 2016 data. So now we're thinking 2016 here. So we fit our model. We have our 2016 data. We have our Juan, Maria, Jose, and Lucy. And so we put a probability on each person based on our models. But as part of our modeling process, our decision process is really made at the housing unit level. So we have to figure out a way to summarize that at the household level. So we did some research with respect to that. So what we determined was the lowest probability, in this case, Lucy Garcia's 0.70 probability, is what we'd associate with the entire household. So we pull that 0.70 forward to associate with 101 Main Street. So that's the output from the person place model. So our second question, how likely does the household composition in administrative records match that of the census? So we first define household composition categories in both the census data and the administrative records data. So the composition categories include vacant or delete. There was nothing there in terms of administrative records or the census. 1 adult, no children. 1 adult with children. 2 adults without children and with children. 3 adults without and with children, and other. 4 adult housing units, so on and so forth. And again, we're going to train our model using 2010 vintage data over our 50 million NERFU addresses. And we're going to use this, as I said, the 2010 vintage administrative records. Okay. So the explanatory variables in this model are similar to the ones that we use in the other models. It's not a complete overlap, but they're similar. So as you might expect, we're trying to predict the census composition. So we have the AR household composition, properties of the address again, the administrative records count, whether or not we observe UAA, indicators for presence of AR sources at this address, indicators of presence of AR sources at other addresses. Can we find that AR person anywhere else over the data? And again, the ACS area level estimates, percentage renters, percentage poverty, percentage black, so on and so forth. So the question is, given that we have 2 adults with 1 children in terms of the Garcia family, from administrative records, what is the probability that the census would have enumerated 2 adults, 1 plus children at this household? So can we get the composition right? And so for example, let's say the Garcia family gets a probability of 0.8 when we apply it to the 2016 records. So here's a similar picture to what we use for the vacant model. But we're going to incorporate these 2 models together. So here's what we did for 2016. So on the left, the vertical axis represents the person-place probability. So in question, that answers the question, are we getting all the persons correct? On the bottom, the horizontal axis represents the household composition probability. Are we getting the composition right? So again, the distance function can be visualized as successive bands of cases emanating from the point 1, 1 in the top right corner. So the cases we think are the best are the ones that are closest to the top right corner. Again, each successive band in this picture represents an additional 1% of the NRFU workload. And in this particular example, remember we had a probability of 0.7 that we associated to the person-place model, and a probability of 0.8 that we associated, you have to kind of figure in the dot there, the probability of 0.8 we associated with the household composition model. And so the Garcia family would fall within the top 1%. So that's a discussion of how we do the modeling. So one of the questions is, well, if we're going to enumerate these cases using administrative records data, how do we get the characteristics? So we have to look through administrative records to get you the characteristics, because we're not going to do an interview, or we haven't done interviews for these particular units. So the administrative record sources that we have researched are for age and sex. We've looked at the census numinant. For race and Hispanic origin, we've looked at prior census, American Community Survey data, other census responses, data on country of origin from the census numinant file, and data from the Census Bureau Best Race and Hispanic origin file produced by CARA. One of the data items is relationship to householder. So we investigated the use of the Census Bureau KidLink file to help assign relationship to householder. With respect to tenure, which is owned or rented, housing and urban development, as well as tax and deed information from commercial files, and for detailed vacancy, those cases for which we assign a vacant status in administrative records, we've looked at using the housing and urban development files. So that's how we take care of characteristics in our research. So let's look at some results applying our modeling to the 2016 census test. So we do the modeling I described in the previous slides, and we identify the occupied, the vacant, and the delete cases. And so what we did in the 2016 census test is we then took a 1 in 5 sample of administrative record identification cases to compare against our determinations against the fieldwork results. So we sent them out into the field, even though we had information to believe that they were occupied, vacant, or delete. And so one caveat from this research is that there was no address canvassing done before the test. So let's look a little bit more deeply at the AR vacant and AR delete identifications. So if you look underneath the AR vacant row, you see a total of 715 cases. These are the cases that we identified as being AR vacant, but we sent out in the field anyway as part of our testing. When we went out in the field, we observed that they were 21.1% occupied, 42.8% vacant, 20.7% delete, and 15.4% unresolved. And you can see the results for our two areas, LA County and Harris County in 2016. So we're going to focus on these 21.1%, or 151 cases, because of the implications of missing people via our administrative records method. An analogous look at our AR delete cases. So we had 313, which we identified as administrative records delete, which we put back out into the sample to be worked in NRFU. 29.1% were occupied, 10.9% were vacant, 48.6% were delete, and 11.5% were unresolved. So we're going to focus on these 29.1%. or 91 cases because of the implications, again, of missing people via our administrative records method. So we did some analysis looking back at, well, what did we get in terms of the USPS UAA reasons for these AR vacant cases and AR delete cases that we determined to be field work occupied when we went out and visited them in the field. So out of these 151 cases that were AR vacant, field work occupied, we look back at our reasons for the mailings that took place around March 21st, March 24th, that they were sent out. So 86 were vacant in both mailings. 29 were vacant in one of the two mailings. 25 had some other reason written twice. And 11 had some other reason written once. So there's about 10 reasons, as I said earlier, of UAA designation that we observed in the 2016 test. So those are the vacant cases. As far as the delete cases, we have our 91 that were AR delete and fieldwork occupied, about 26 of which we observed when we look back at the UAA data. There was no such number both times the letter carrier went to visit. 29 were no such number once. Some other reason 27 times, and some other reason, some other reason twice, 27 times, and some other reason once, 9 times. So, we're continuing to work with the United States Postal Service to better understand the meaning of the UAA codes. So as part of the 2016 census test, we conducted focus groups with the letter carriers to develop qualitative understanding behind the codes assigned. What is it like for the boots on the ground, so to speak? In addition, we completed visits to the regional mail centers in Los Angeles and Houston to better understand the mechanics of the UAA assignment. So possible enhancements include conducting training about UAA assignment or informational posters, limiting the amount of reason codes that we receive, and leveraging the national change of address data going forward. So, recall the AR mailing in one of the first slides that I sent out. I didn't send it out, but recall the AR mailing sent out around May 15th. So, for the AR occupied cases, we caught it as soon as we took it out after that first visit was unresolved. We sent out about 8,400 cases, and we found that a UAA occurred on 125 of them, so about 1.5% of the time. So, our rationale was, late in May, people could have moved it out since Census Day. For our AR vacant cases, we had about 2,800. We sent out the mailing at 2,848, and we got a UAA back on 57.3%. So we conjectured that people could move in since Census Day, since we called it vacant, and we had indication from UAA data around April 1st. And it was UAA on about 57% of the time on May 15th, around there. As far as AR delete cases, they were UAA only about 75.4% of the time out of the 1,200 we sent it out to. And this seems less likely to change from not housing it to housing it. So this result, we're expecting to be closer to about 100%, although not precisely, but to the idea of going from not being a housing unit to a housing unit in 6 weeks, this will be a little bit low to us. So again, we're going to use the UAA information from the AR mailing going forward, and I'm going to show how we're going to do that in a few slides. So, as you might expect, we use the 2010 data in a great measure to kind of understand our methods and improve in our methods. So we'll run various simulations on the 2010 data to kind of understand what's the effect of using administrative records in this way. So we're running a simulation. This table shows the results when we implement our AR modeling methods on 2010 census data. So essentially, we're kind of performing internal validation on our 2010 census data. So the leftmost column shows the distribution by percent Hispanic, and the block group obtained 5-year ACS estimates from 2010 to 2014, or excuse me, from 2006 to 2010, so look at 2010 data. So we go from 0 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%, so on and so forth. So the next columns show the number of addresses that were in the 2010 NERFO universe, the percentage of cases in that universe that we would simulate as being AR vacant, the percentage of cases that we simulated as being AR occupied, and the percentage of cases which would have received full contacts. For example, the top row contains all block groups where the Hispanic rate was between 0 and 10%. In block groups with these concentrations, there are about 31.3 million out of about our 49 million, 50 million NERFU cases. And amongst these units, about 11.6% were identified as AR vacant, 15.9% AR occupied, and 72.5% were identified for full contacts. And the thing to notice with this particular chart is that as you go from the top to the bottom, there's a degradation in terms of the use of administrative records or identification of administrative records vacant and administrative records occupied cases. So as you get to the bottom with the highest concentrations of Hispanicity, those are the cases in which we do have most units with full contacts. So the next slide, we perform a similar type of analysis on the non-Hispanic Black population. Again, we're breaking it down by concentrations we have observed in the ACS data, 0 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%, so on and so forth. So notice as you go from less non-Hispanic Black to more non-Hispanic Black, the rate of full contacts increases until you get to the blocks with the most non-Hispanic Black concentration. So we look back through the UAA data, and you can see there's a little bit of a climb in the UAA data that we observed in the 2010 census, and that most non-Hispanic Black, or 50% non-Hispanic Black area, which led to the high AR vacant designation. So to summarize, or to finally get to our 2018 contact strategy, how do we use our 2016 information to inform what we're going to do in 2018? So I'm going to take you back to the picture of 2016. What I'm going to highlight here in gray is the cases where we sent the mailing to our address, right? So we have in the top path, we have our vacant and non-existent cases. We send out the mailing to the address. We got our self-response if we were lucky. If we didn't, it was vacant. Bottom path, we called it occupied. We send our mailing out. Self-response, we take. Administrative records occupied, if not. So we're going to use information from that AR mailing address going forward. And so the last slide is somewhat busy, but I'll walk through it. So the change in 2018 is that the presence or absence of UAA data obtained through the AR mailing to the vacant, non-existent top path, or the occupied in the bottom path units inform our fill procedures. So if AR vacant or non-existent units, if we receive a UAA result from the additional AR mailing sent out in the middle of May, it will somewhat confirm our original identification of a vacant or non-existent. And I shaded those cases in red. So we're not going to go out to the field. If we get a self-response when we send out this additional mailing, we will accept that in yellow. This is what was done in 2016. If after a certain period of time we do not receive a UAA, even though I identified as AR vacant or non-existent, we're going to send it back out to the field. This is in green, and this is the change from 2016. So in effect, for a unit to be considered AR vacant or AR non-existent, we're going to require that UAA indication on the wrong census day, which we did in 2016. We're also going to require that UAA identification on that AR mailing at the middle to end of May. So occupied units, kind of the same idea, but done differently. So we have our administrative records occupied units. We send our mailing to our address in gray. If we receive a UAA result from the additional mailing sent out in the middle of May, it will conflict with our original identification of occupied. Remember, we think this is an occupied unit. We sent out this additional mailing. We found out that it's UAA, end of May. We're actually going to send those cases to field work going forward. That's the part in orange. Again, if we get a self-response, we'll accept that in yellow. And finally, the part in blue. If we don't receive an additional UAA in the mail mailing, we continue with the identification of AR occupied, and that's the part in blue. So in other words, for a unit to be considered AR occupied, there's going to be no UAA identification at the beginning and in the middle of May. So the big story about 2018 as we're acting upon this, using our AR million to kind of inform our contact strategy going forward. So that's the research to this point, and I'm going to toss it back to Mary Ann.
Thank you, Andy. Andy, Tom Muley, Scott Kanicki, and Ingrid Kelkard, and the rest of their team have done a tremendous job in researching and refining our methodology for administrative records usage in the non-response follow-up operation. We also want to take a minute to thank those of you in the audience, those that may be watching online or elsewhere who have offered us advice and guidance and recommendations along the way. It has certainly helped to shape the approach that we're taking for 2020. And now what I'd like to do is move into a series of slides that will provide you information with regard to the way we will be implementing non-response follow-up as part of the 2018 end-to-end census test. The 2018 end-to-end census test will provide a rich environment to test major components of the 2020 census. The test is planned in 3 locations covering approximately 771,000 housing units. The test locations are Pierce County, Washington, Providence County, Rhode Island, and the Bluefield, Beckley, Oak Hill area of West Virginia, with a census day of April 1st of 2018. These sites were selected because both separately and combined, they present opportunities and challenges for us as we plan our census operations. The sites contain high vacancy rates, different levels of connectivity, and are a mix of urban and rural areas. They are demographically and socioeconomically diverse and provide us opportunities to refine our efforts to engage the population to respond to the census. While our prior census tests have focused on specific research and evaluation, our goal for the 2018 end-to-end census test focuses on the overall integration of systems and operational procedures. The test validates that the included operations will be production ready for the 2020 census. The validation is achieved by testing major operational threads that includes our systems, our procedures, and infrastructure. Additionally, the test is an opportunity to produce a prototype of geographic and data products. Next slide, please. Most of you will likely remember seeing this slide in past PMRs. This graphic depicts the operations that are in scope for the 2018 end-to-end census test. The operations in scope are represented in the dark and light purple, while the 10 operations that are out of scope for the 2018 end-to-end test are represented in brown. You'll also notice the highlighted operations with the orange ring around them. These 5 operations have not previously been tested and will be included for the first time as part of the 2018 end-to-end test. They include update enumerate, group quarters, data products and dissemination, redistricting data, and archiving. Next slide, please. As you can see from the key activities, production work for the 2018 end-to-end census test has already begun. In-office address canvassing is complete. The regional census centers have been opened, and recruitment for the address canvassing field staff is underway. The RCCs are located and contained within the existing regional office space and will be used by the staff hired to support the 2018 end-to-end census test activities. The regional census centers managing the test areas for the 2018 end-to-end census test are the New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles regional census centers. The area census offices supporting the 2018 end-to-end census test were scheduled to open at the end of March. However, due to some delays with the build-out of the offices, the area census offices will open this spring. The area census offices will be located in 3 locations: Providence, Rhode Island, which is managed by the New York Regional Census Center; Beckley, West Virginia, which is managed by the Philadelphia Regional Census Center; and Pierce County, Washington, which will be managed by the Los Angeles Regional Census Center. Recruiting for the peak operations will begin in August of this year and that will include the recruitment of staff for update enumerate, non-response follow-up, and group quarters. Additional activities that support the 2018 end-to-end census test include self-response beginning on March 19th and wrapping up at the end of July of 2018. Also, non-response follow-up beginning on April 3rd and it finishing also by the end of July of 2018. And finally, the prototype of Public Law 94-171, the geographic and data products, will be published no later than April 1st of 2019. Provided on this slide is a little additional detail about the operational timeline associated with the conduct of the non-response follow-up operation for the 2018 end-to-end test. With the 2018 end-to-end test, we will implement for the first time in the 2020 census life cycle what we refer to as early non-response follow-up, and I will talk about that in a little more detail in a few slides. But early NRFU will begin just days after Census Day and will run up through May 9th, when we then transition over to our full production non-response follow-up operation. The training for enumerators working in the early NRFU areas will begin on March 26th of 2018, with the balance of the enumerators being trained beginning on May 3rd of 2018. We'll conduct the non-response follow-up data collection through July 24th of 2018, with the non-response follow-up re-interview field data collection concluding at the end of July 31st. With this slide, we'll illustrate the various pushes and pulls to and from the non-response follow-up universe. So first, before I get into the details, a little bit of note about the coloring. The light blue text and lines represent sources that contribute addresses to the non-response follow-up workload. The red text and lines represent removals from the non-response follow-up universe prior to any contact attempts being made. And the purple text and lines represent the completed case removals from the non-response follow-up workload. So if we start on the left-hand side of the graphic, the largest contributor to the non-response follow-up operation are those addresses that, after multiple chances to encourage self-response, have not responded. These addresses will come from both our self-response type of enumeration area as well as our update enumerate type of enumeration area. And some of these non-responding addresses will be included in the early non-response follow-up, which I'll speak to again on the next slide. So also on the left-hand side of the graphic, you can see the administrative records removals for the vacant, the delete, and the occupied that Angie just spoke about. The administrative records vacant and delete are depicted in red, since they are initially removed from the workload prior to any contact attempts. And as Andy was talking about earlier, we now show a light blue line that goes back into the field data collection that represents those cases for which we did not receive that final undeliverable as addressed information based on that last non-response follow-up mailing. Shown in purple are the administrative records occupied cases, which are removed from the non-response follow-up workload after one unsuccessful attempt to enumerate the non-responding address. And again, as Andy noted earlier, we now show a blue line that represents cases that will go back into the field data collection, which occurs when we now have received an undeliverable address as addressed piece of mail for cases that we had believed to be occupied. Also on the left-hand side of the graphic, you can see our non-response follow-up re-interview cases. The non-response follow-up re-interview cases are depicted by two lines going into the data collection. One line goes directly into the field data collection and will cover those cases for which we did not receive a respondent-provided telephone number. The second line depicts the NRFU re-interview cases that were selected for which we do have a respondent-provided telephone number, and as a result can go directly to our telephone data collection. The non-response follow-up interview data collection will be conducted using our census questionnaire assistance solution. You can also see at the very bottom of the graphic, there is a blue line that depicts the recycling of cases from our telephone data collection mode up into the field data collection, as well as a purple line that depicts the fact that we will complete many cases for the non-response follow-up interview via the telephone data collection mode. And that's for both, yes. At the top right of the graphic, represented in purple, are our completed cases. The cases can be removed from the non-response follow-up workload as a result of late self-responses. So these are responses that may just have been coming in as we've selected the NRFU workload and that we're able to remove from the NRFU workload and not make contact attempts on. They may also result from the notice of visit that we leave when we've knocked at the non-responding household doors. We also have many of the cases that will be completed just as a function of our field data collection activities. Now, if we move to the center part on the right-hand side, there are a number of sources that will contribute workload to the non-response follow-up workload in the 2018 end-to-end census test. First, response validation. We will send a sample only of cases from the 2018 end-to-end test where we will recollect the response data to validate information obtained via the self-response. We will also send to NRFU any paper responses that we received that were ultimately deemed to be insufficient. So for example, a paper return comes back to us. We haven't included it in the non-response follow-up universe because we have the response. But as we've checked in the data, we determine that that form is blank, so the information is insufficient. As a result, we need to now put that case back into the field and have the enumerators attempt contact with those addresses to try to collect the response data. With the 2018 end-to-end census test, we will also include cases that require field verification that will either confirm the existence of an address or refute the existence of an address. Field verification will be discussed in a little more detail in an upcoming slide. And also with the 2018 end-to-end census test, we will add to the non-response follow-up universe any addresses received on a spring 2018 United States Postal Service delivery sequence file that are new to our universe and meet our eligibility requirements for being included in the census enumeration. In 2020, in addition to the spring DSF, operations such as LUCA Appeals, new construction, the Housing Unit Count Review Program may also add addresses into the non-response follow-up workload. For all of these operations, the addresses that would be added are considered new to us. They aren't addresses that we had previously included in our workload or in our universe, and will require the creation of a new master address file extract and a subsequent sample delivery file that are needed to be able to get these cases to our operational control system for field attempts to be made. For any of these addresses that come to us as new, we will attempt to mail either an invitation letter or a questionnaire to these addresses to provide an opportunity for them to self-respond before we begin making personal visit contact attempts. We're planning this now so that we don't repeat what we did in the 2010 census, where we stood up a very late design change to implement a late add mailing to put mail pieces into the stream for these cases that came in late in the census process. A final source of addresses that contribute to the non-response follow-up workload are addresses that are identified as part of our coverage improvement efforts. Coverage improvement cases are cases for which there is some question about the accuracy of the roster, meaning that there may be overcoverage or undercoverage with the response that we have. The coverage improvement cases will be sent to the telephone data collection mode, and attempts will be made to reach the original respondent to recollect information and to probe in order to try to resolve the questions that we have about the household roster. And finally, although we do not expect many in-field ads, we have accounted for the possibility, as depicted by the light blue cloud in the center of the graphic. The need for in-field ads could arrive should we discover a geographic area that was missed, and as a result, those addresses were not included in the universe, as well as any other situations that could occur where we might need to add an address to the universe. Okay. On to early non-response follow-up. So, as I promised earlier, we'll talk a little bit about this. This is a new dimension to our operational design for non-response follow-up. In the 2010 census, a late design change occurred, resulting in the implementation of early enumeration of some college and university students in off-campus housing. This occurred very specifically for colleges and universities whose spring semester ended prior to our planned start of the NRFU production. Without starting NRFU early in these areas and attempting contact at these non-responding addresses, we risked those students living in that off-campus housing moving out of their housing and returning either to their parents' home or going elsewhere and not being present when we were attempting non-response follow-up. So to identify the eligible areas, the Regional Census Center staff did research on the schools in their area on trying to determine what the end date for the spring semester would be. If those schools were going to end before we started non-response follow-up production, we identified blocks surrounding the campus that had a high likelihood of this off-campus housing. So we're trying to plan this now for 2020, and the early NRFU operation will be added to the 2018 end-to-end test for the first time since 2010. The results of this test will inform the approach that we ultimately take for 2020. For the 2018 end-to-end census test, regional office staff have identified the basic collection units, or BCUs, that will be eligible for early NRFU. The Philadelphia Regional Census Center has concluded that there will be no early NRFU in the Bluefield, Beckley, Oak Hill, West Virginia site. And shown on this slide are the BCUs that were identified by the New York Regional Office that are eligible for early NRFU in the Providence, Rhode Island site. The Los Angeles Regional Census Center has also identified areas in the Pierce, Washington site, but I do not have a map to show as a slide depicting those. The contact attempts in the early NRFU eligible BCUs will begin in early April and will occur until the balance of NRFU operation begins in mid-May, at which point any remaining cases will just transition over into the balance of the NRFU workload. Okay. Enumerator training. Our approach to enumerator training, for the most part, remains unchanged from that which we've implemented with our past tests. The enumerator training will involve a balance of online and classroom training. And there are various benefits associated with the online training, including the fact that it is self-paced for the field staff. It is a standardized delivery, which eliminates any individual instructor's interpretation of the training or any potential deficiencies in their delivery of the content. We'll also use an interactive training, and the online training provides an easy ability for us to incorporate edits into the training, thus eliminating a lot of the need for sending errata sheets, which we know is a less than efficient way to communicate and convey changes. Our training approach will also include a facilitated classroom component that's augmented with hands-on practice using the devices that our enumerators will use to collect census responses. We'll use scenario-based videos, demonstrations, and simulations to show how the devices operate. We'll also include automated knowledge and skills assessments, which will help us better identify any of the enumerators who may need additional assistance or where we're having specific challenges with some of the training content. We'll also have electronic manuals and job aids accessible online and via the enumerator's device, with the ability to search the content very specifically and easily. The content and the subject matter of the training continues to evolve. For the 2016 census test, we did learn and identify areas where our training content was insufficient, very specifically with regard to proxy responses, what they are, why they're important, and how to complete a proxy response. As we evolve the training for the 2018 end-to-end test, we will retool our training on the proxy responses to strengthen it as we move forward. And as we evolve the content, we must consider where to place our emphasis on the many facets of the job that an enumerator has to do, balancing that content, the critical components of the enumerator's jobs, and of course, the schedule and cost of conducting the training. Andy spoke earlier about administrative records usage and its influence on our field data collection contact strategies. To reiterate, the administrative records modeling outcomes include administrative records vacant, administrative records delete, administrative records occupied, and cases for which we make no determination. Each of these outcomes informs the number of contacts a non-responding address receives. The administrative records vacant and the administrative records delete are removed from the non-responding workload prior to any contact attempts. Administrative records occupied will receive one contact attempt day in an effort to find a respondent at home and collect the response directly from them. If we're unsuccessful in that contact attempt, those cases are removed from the NRFU workload. No determination cases receive a maximum of 6 contact attempt days. Non-responding addresses become proxy eligible upon the 3rd unsuccessful contact attempt to reach a resident at a non-responding census address. They also become proxy eligible when the enumerator observes a unit as vacant or as not a housing unit, and if a supervisor determines a case should be proxy eligible or proxy required for a number of other reasons. And there is a maximum daily limit of 3 proxy attempts for a specific non-responding address. The contact strategy for multi-unit managers will be discussed in more detail on the next slide. Field verification cases, which will also be discussed on an upcoming slide, will receive 1 contact attempt. Self-responding vacant addresses from our internet self-response will be included in the NRFU workload and will receive 1 contact attempt to confirm the vacancy status. If in that contact attempt we see evidence that the address is not vacant, it will be subject to additional contact attempts to reach a respondent and collect the response data. And response validation recollect cases will receive a maximum of 3 contact attempts. Multi-unit manager visits were tested for the first time during the 2016 census test. The purpose or the goal of the multi-unit manager visits is the resolution of occupancy status for non-responding addresses at multi-unit complexes. Non-responding addresses that a manager can confirm either are or were vacant at census day enable us to resolve cases more efficiently and reduce the need for us to make repeated attempts at those addresses for enumeration to resolve the cases. The process includes grouping of the non-responding addresses within a multi-unit, enumerators attempting to reach a manager for that multi-unit complex, talking with the building manager to resolve the addresses that he or she can designate as vacant or non-existent, and as a result, eliminating the need for subsequent contact attempts, and addresses that are identified by the manager as occupied or where the manager cannot determine the status for us, those will be assigned to enumerators for subsequent contact attempts to reach a respondent at that non-responding address to collect the data. Our implementation of the multi-unit manager visits in the 2016 census test was very successful, but it didn't come without us learning a lot of lessons and finding opportunities for improvement. For the 2018 end-to-end census test, we will modify the approach for conducting and completing the multi-unit manager visits. We will increase the number of units at a multi-unit structure that triggers the eligibility for a manager visit, and we will conduct a maximum of 2 manager visits before attempting to assign all of the non-responding addresses for enumeration attempts. In the 2016 census test, if the enumerator was unsuccessful in reaching a manager at a manager visit, all of the non-responding cases at that multi-unit complex became immediately eligible for the enumerator to try to find someone at home to resolve the status and collect the response data. This resulted in us sending enumerators often at times of the day where we were less likely to find people at home, and resulted in some inefficiencies. Next slide, please. Field verification. In the 2018 end-to-end census test, we will add a new component to the operational design, which is the addition of the field verification addresses to the non-response follow-up workload. Field verification cases are a byproduct of our non-ID responses. These are addresses that had previously not been known to us or not represented in our frame, but for which we were able to assign a geocode and can send an enumerator out to try to find. Many or most of these non-ID responses will be confirmed through the automated and clerical processes that are being established, but there will some that will not be resolved through that process and that will require us to go to the field in an attempt to locate those addresses. When the enumerator is able to locate and confirm that the address exists, GPS coordinates will be collected and captured as pair data associated with those cases. The field verification cases are subject to one enumerator effort to try to locate and resolve that case. And for these field verification cases, we do not capture the response data as we've already obtained that response data through the non-ID process. As mentioned earlier, in the 2016 census test, we did have some challenges with our proxy enumeration. Proxy enumeration occurs when attempts to contact a non-responding household to determine the occupancy status and to complete the census enumeration are unsuccessful. Enumerators will attempt to locate a person with sufficient knowledge, a proxy, to provide the census enumeration. The importance of successful proxy enumeration cannot be understated. In the 2010 census, of the non-response follow-up occupied housing units, a proxy was the respondent 24% of the time. By comparison, in the 2016 census test, our proxy enumeration rate was less than 10%, which contributed to the high rate of unresolved cases in the 2016 census test that reached their maximum attempt threshold without a successful enumeration at the conclusion of the test. When cases become proxy eligible depends on the situation that an enumerator encounters. Cases can become proxy eligible at different points in time, most notably upon the third unsuccessful attempt at what is believed to be an occupied address. Cases become immediately proxy eligible when we determine that we have an in-mover situation where the current resident moved in after census day. And cases become proxy eligible immediately upon the determination that the address is vacant, non-residential, or non-existent. Our 2016 census test experience did point to challenges that we need to overcome with acquiring proxies. As I spoke about a minute ago in the training, we definitely understand the need to emphasize the importance in our training of proxy response and to improve our proxy procedures. And as I just mentioned, our 2016 census test experiences pointed to the fact that proxy responses are so critical to us being able to resolve many of our cases. For the 2018 end-to-end census test, we are enhancing the training on proxy concepts, and we have made modifications to our enumeration data collection application to capture the occupancy status in the housing unit population in the case of occupied units earlier in the proxy interview. We'll now talk a minute about non-response follow-up quality control. With the operational design, we are attempting to infuse quality throughout the entire process. One component of this, as mentioned earlier, is that the enumerators are subject to assessments during the training that will help us to assist us in identifying enumerators that may require some early remediation or may point out topics in the training where we need to take some extra steps to reiterate or emphasize key points of what the enumerator's job will be. In addition, all cases are subject to automated edits within our data collection application and operational control system alerts that could identify enumerators who are not following procedures. A sample of the non-response follow-up cases, up to a 10% sample in the 2018 end-to-end census test, will be selected for a quality control re-interview. All cases will be reviewed via the Sampling, Matching, Review, and Coding System, or SMARCS, for indications of falsification using administrative records and paradata. The NRFU production cases will be matched to the administrative records, which includes the federal, state, and third-party data sources. And the paradata examination will include such things as GPS data and the length of interview information, as well as a number of other characteristics. Suspicious cases that result from the SMARCS processing will be selected for the quality control re-interview. For the selected cases where we have the respondent provided telephone number, again, these cases will be sent to our census questionnaire assistants for telephone contact attempts to reach the respondent and recollect the information. If the census questionnaire assistance process is unsuccessful after 3 days of contact attempts, the cases will be redirected to the field for further attempts by an enumerator. Cases without the respondent provided telephone number will be sent directly to the field for up to 3 contact attempts by an enumerator to conduct the re-interview. One staff conducts both the data collection for the non-response follow-up production cases and the non-response follow-up re-interview cases, with the condition that the enumerator cannot do a re-interview on any of the cases that they worked in production. Finally, I'll mention a few enhancements that we will be making to our field operational control system. The information on this slide focuses on additional alerts that we will include as part of our field operational control system. What is shown is not an exhaustive list of all of the alerts, nor is it an exhaustive list of all of the enhancements that we're making to the field operational control system. Most of these alerts have been specified as a result of our 2016 census test experiences. The alerts that we plan to implement include an alert related to proxy attempts that will identify enumerators who have 2 or more cases that became proxy eligible, but for which the enumerator did not make any proxy attempts. We'll have an alert associated with reopening cases. This will help us to identify when an enumerator opens 2 or more inactive cases but did not complete the case. We want to create the ability to reopen cases in the situation when an enumerator has completed an attempt for a case, has moved on, and then sees the respondent for the previous address come home. But we also need to be careful of that becoming something that is abused. We also will have an alert associated with working before the assigned hours. This alert will identify enumerators who begin making contact attempts 30 minutes or more before their assigned start time. This will identify situations where an enumerator is working in hours that are not deemed to be the most optimal for a successful enumeration. We have an alert related to unconfirmed deletes, where an enumerator has 2 or more deletes that have not had any steps taken to confirm that they are in fact non-existent. We have an alert related to the high field resolution rate, where it just seems, where we're identifying an enumerator who is seemingly resolving cases at a much higher rate than others. We also have new alerts related to both high and low cases per hour, which will identify enumerators that are working at either high or low rates compared to their peers in the area. I should stress that the triggering of alerts, these alerts as well as any other alerts, identify behaviors that a supervisor must address with the enumerator. An enumerator's behavior may be very explainable and is not necessarily an immediate indicator of a problem, but must be at least addressed with the enumerators such that corrective action can be taken as necessary. In closing, let me reiterate that what was presented today provided insight to many aspects of the non-response follow-up operational design, but there are many other additional topics that we were not able to address today. For example, for the 2018 end-to-end test, we will implement operational closeout procedures. I know this is a topic that many of you are interested in, and we will dedicate more time to the operational closeout procedures and many other components of the operational design at an upcoming PMR. And with that, we welcome some questions.
Thank you. Not really sure where to begin. I think I'll just do a couple of things here, and we can maybe follow up later on for some of the specific stuff. I think slide 46 shows really nice color coding of the admin records results or outcomes, I guess, the red and the blue boxes. And I was curious, in 2015 or so, we heard at PMRs and when the operational plan came out that October, November, there were really specific, estimates of what percentage of the NERFR workload was going to get resolved by administrative records in boxes like that. And has that number been updated, what you're expecting from the 2018 end-to-end test, or moving forward, has that number changed in terms of what you're expecting?
We have been updating those numbers as a matter of the course associated with revisiting our life cycle cost estimates. And I believe that the latest update of the life cycle cost estimate is
This spring, I think we're still working on refining our life cycle cost estimate. The numbers are being updated as we do it, as Mary Ann's indicating. We expect that we'll have those resolved. And hopefully, once we get through the clearance process, able to share them. In terms of, related to the life cycle cost estimate, in terms of the percent of cases associated for the administrative records removals, we do have those. I think we're still finishing the refinement of those numbers right now. There have been some changes. I believe at previous program management reviews, and Andy can correct me, the vacant percent went from about 10 or 11%, and based on our test results, it's come down a bit to 7 or 8%, something like that. Does that sound about right? And that's the area where we've had the principal change, but we're still, I think, working through a lot of those work numbers. The data that I just shared between that change from the 2015 life cycle cost estimate and that like 11% to what we're looking at now is really what led Andy and the group and Mary Ann to look at the administrative record strategy and our attempts and make the refinements that you see here. As we've always said when we talk about our use of administrative records, while we're using them to help us reduce the non-response follow-up workload, we're only going to use them where we have high quality information, and we feel confident about that. Thus, the changes that we've made to the design are really important to us.
Thank you. On that last point about using the data where they're really good, can you speak to any, I don't know, Andy or Andrew or somebody else, can you speak to any, I don't know, business rules that you may be considering regarding data sufficiency, the minimum amount of data you need to make a determination that even though your model is probabilistically based and comes up with, you've got thresholds, and that helps you decide where you will use the administrative records or not, are there any other data efficiency requirements that you could describe that you may be considering that would also have to be in place?
Go ahead and take that question. So for the vacant units, one of the things that we required was some sort of UAA designation either on the first or second mailing, as well as for the delete units. So that was a requirement. Right. And then on the occupied side, we really restrict down to housing units that have a composition of either 1 adult, 2 adult, 3 adult units with and without children. We don't use any of the 4 adult cases, and we restrict our universe to cases where the administrative records population is between 1 and 6 persons on it. So we put those kind of business rules into our administrative records models to remove those cases or to flag them as occupied and vacant.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And those, is it safe to assume those are, I mean, those are in flux? That's what you're working with now? Has that been decided? I mean, you're still doing research on that?
That's the approach we've taken for the past 2 tests in terms of the vacants and I think we've done that approach longer for the occupied, but we're working off that rule pretty, I'd say it's pretty solid in terms of the application of both of those rules. We're looking in terms of the vacancy, doing some research about do we need to develop more rules in terms of offer models, but I think that's more of a research focus. But those 2 I mentioned are pretty solid.
Okay, great. And on that same thread, anything about information about specific individuals, like requiring age or requiring like the numinant or a PIC or something like that? Is there anything along those lines?
Yeah, so for the administrative records enumerations, in effect, every case has a protected identification or key or a PIC. And in order to kind of form those household compositions, we already have age. So we've gotten age off of the census numinant file because we can't really form the compositions without knowing the ages of the persons within the units. How do we know who's a child or an adult, so on and so forth? So we require that characteristic data. As a matter of fact, a lot of that, the administrative record data, pretty much nearly all the cases have sex, and about 90% of the cases usually have some sort of race and Hispanic origin indication on the administrative record data that goes into our models. So we have a pretty good, in terms of characteristic idea of, who we're looking at. And so all those become covariates in our models to kind of determine who's occupied.
That's really helpful, thanks. And then on the data, you mentioned data sufficiency on the actually, you talked about the paper returns going out to the field if they didn't have enough data. You gave an example of a blank form. Is there some sort of minimum data sufficiency, data definition that's required or something before it goes out to the field? I mean, clearly a blank form is pretty easy to determine, but are there some elements that if you had that, then it wouldn't go out to field, even if it was incomplete?
So there are data sufficiency rules, and I was wondering if Sarah was still back there. I think she's more well-versed. If she's not there, I can certainly get those requirements to you. Oh, she is still here.
If I might, I think that might be the best way to handle it, is if we
Okay.
just take that question.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll get back to you.
Just take a comparison because you got what you use in the administrative records.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I was too busy trying to turn it off.
No worries. Going back to that slide 46 that Ty had mentioned. So in 2010, you had the vacant delete check operation, which I think was the operation to verify the delete twice. So looking at slide 46, following the trail, I can see where the administrative records is sort of the one delete, and then you're sending out to field, and then if there's another delete, then it's over. But if you follow the very bottom path, you're not having that second delete. So is that just sort of an operational decision that once in the field, they say once it's deleted, it's over?
Actually, this doesn't depict the full non-response follow-up contact strategy in terms of being in the field. So our contact strategy when we're in the field, if an enumerator identifies an address as vacant, that it will immediately become proxy eligible. If they can find someone in the field at that point in time that can confirm that the address is vacant, that in a sense is its second confirmation, and that case will be done. If the enumerator cannot find someone that can confirm that address as vacant, the case is still unresolved. It will come back for another contact attempt, ideally with a different enumerator. And if that second enumerator also confirms the vacancy status, it will be done, but it will still be proxy eligible for us to try to find somebody that can also confirm it.
Following up on the quality control. So in 2000, the supervisor and manager for quality control and production were the same. In 2010, you separated it and had the assistant manager for quality control and the supervisors for quality control. What are you doing in 2020?
So I'm sorry, so you're asking me about the specific staffing in the offices, in the area census offices?
Well, it's the area census offices and I guess the supervisors that are in the field, or
So
whatever the field structure is going to be.
as I said, with the enumerators, it's one staff that conducts both the production and the quality control, with the stipulation that they cannot conduct a quality control in any of the cases that they did in production. Then their supervisors are the census field supervisors. We do not have unique CFSs for production versus QC. And then I'm going to need help when it comes to the area census office. I think we just have the census field managers, but I would want to confirm that. I do not believe that we make a distinction between the CFMs for production or QC. Our ability to change the way we implemented this from 2010 to 2020 is a function of all of the automation and the control and the removal of decisions from the human and placing those decisions in the hands of the systems and the business rules that we implement.
Other questions?
All right, Dan Cork, National Academies. That's a good slide to have up there. I want to start off at the risk of being impolitic, but earlier Lisa used the language that we have moved firmly from research and development into execution. The administrative records usage still seems to be one, particularly even going with the title, one that is still more firmly in research and making tentative steps to execution. In terms of that contact strategy that you're going to roll out in 2018, I'm just curious, how comfortable are you with it, with its stability? Are there points in that you think are still variable, up in the air? How close is that to, in your minds, being solid as contact strategy for 2020?
Dan, I'm going to start, and then I'm going to let Andy finish, or perhaps Mary Ann finish, but let me start with an explanation. I believe, and I still believe, we have moved firmly into execution. Moving firmly into execution doesn't mean we have the answer to every question or a decision made for every point. It means we have a high-level plan, it means we have detailed plans below that, and it means that we understand what it is we will be doing as we move forward. The reason we're spending the time on this today and the reason we're showing the strategy is because we have learned a lot over the testing that we've done, particularly related to non-response follow-up, starting with our 2013 test. All of the changes that we've made leading up to this design reflect the best information that we have today, and the information and the design that we believe will be the design that we will use for the 2020 census. With that said, that doesn't mean that we won't learn something in the test that will cause us to change it. This is why we do tests. If we were 100% confident, we'd have no need for the end-to-end census test.
Right, and I'm not challenging that at all. It's just, and there's no unique way or right way to present things, but this presentation was, here's the body of research, and punchline is where we're thinking of going. The other way of presenting it is, this is what we're doing, and related to that, why we're doing these particular steps. It's just a different way of telling the story, and it has a different feel when you hear it, or if expressed in different ways.
Thanks. Ooh, okay. I certainly appreciate your perspective on that. I think from our perspective, we were really looking forward to the opportunity today to share with everyone all of the research and all of the lessons that we've learned on a very complex topic and pulling it all together leading into what we are proposing to do for 18. But I appreciate the point and the way you've conveyed it.
Just a couple of quicker things. On slide 52, coverage improvement is indicated as an arrow flow into telephone data collection. That presumably is a check on things coming in through the self-response channel, or edit flags coming into that would go into the telephone workshop are treated as NRFU cases, or what is that?
It's not limited to just self-response. It could be any case for which we have some question about the household roster for that case.
Okay.
the details about which types of cases will ultimately go to coverage improvement is still being refined and detailed, but we could potentially still have cases from non-response follow-up that could cycle into coverage improvement. Not as likely with this design, with the automation that can catch and check things like count discrepancies that we used to have significant numbers of in a paper environment.
Okay.
And did I miss a component of that, or did I answer your question?
No, that was it. That was
Okay.
what I was getting at. Along the way, group quarters advanced contact got mentioned, just as an element in the table. Group quarters is still evolving as an operation. I get that. That's fine. I'm just curious, in the current notion of things, who does the group quarters advanced contact? Is that all individual field staff making the initial visit? Is it done by the regional centers, try to contact hospital groups or major colleges and universities? Is it delegated to the area? Is it a hybrid?
Dan, I'm not positive and would like to check before I give an answer and give an accurate answer about that, unless there is someone in the audience that can ensure that we're giving an accurate answer.
Actually, I think Judy's not here today, but I believe it's done in the area census offices currently.
Okay. Just, and I don't want to hog the floor, but I could actually go back to the very first presentation, just a couple of small things nagging at me. Is there a timeline on release of the final residence rule and criteria, more refined than just sometime later this year, or still evolving?
We're still completing the research associated with that topic, and I think later this year is a fair statement. We'll certainly have and release the information related to the residence criteria as soon as we've completed that analysis.
Fair enough. And then just one final comment that came up on the red, yellow, green risk assessment slide when you added on as a new program issue, increased workload for the address canvassing operation. Just seeing that in print, it struck me that at least some word was mentioned, increased field work for the address canvassing operation. You don't want to discount the in-office component. The overall workload for the address canvassing operation wouldn't increase unless we add a significant amount of territory to the, yeah. But it's just it's the field versus office divide.
Got it. We can make the wording more clearing, but I follow what you're saying.
I just have a couple of questions for Mary Ann. At the beginning of the 2018 test discussion, you said you were going to talk about how the 2018 test would refine and remove certain aspects of the operational design. You talked a lot about the refinements. What about things that are being removed? I didn't catch anything regarding that, or maybe it was implicit in some of the refinements, but.
I would say for the most part, things are being refined and less about things that are being removed. You know, we continue to evolve the design and some of the capabilities within our enumeration application and within the operational control systems. I can't think of a specific example right now of things that we have dropped, but that possibility still does exist for things that may not prove themselves to be as effective as we would have hoped.
Okay. Regarding the new OCS alerts, so you've obviously added some, and then you said at the end that the alerts must be responded to by a supervisor. In the past, that hasn't been the case, right? Mm-hmm. Have you added controls to ensure that alerts don't go unresponded to by the supervisors for this 2018 test?
Yes, we are planning to add checks within the operational control system to look for stale alerts and to produce reports for at the CFS level and the CFM level about the alerts.
Okay, good.
Okay, I think we're right at 3 o'clock, so it's time for our break. There may be additional questions, but we'll have additional opportunities for questions as we proceed through the afternoon. So if we take a 15-minute break, we will reconvene at 3:15. So thank you.